So there was a controversial clip of Twitch streamer Mike from Pa. Okay, so here is the clip in question. I hope you can play this on YouTube if you're criticizing it.
Between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed
That's
that
crazy.
So it's like reacting to a Netanyahu speech.
Jew is not a fucking ethnic. It is Jewish is not an ethnicity. This constructed.
Okay, so that is correct. Jew is not an ethnicity. I made a video about this. Jews are not an ethnicity. In fact, I'm going to play this later, but I just want to make that very clear. What he said right there, that Jew is not an ethnicity, I agree with that. It's not an ethnicity. So let's listen onward. And okay, so BadEmpanada is going to respond to this. I actually do like BadEmpanada. I've watched his videos before, and I mostly agree with what he's saying, but I don't agree with what he's saying in this video.
Ethnicity. This demonic ethnicity. Wholly invented.
That's a weird thing to say. I don't know. It seems pretty clipped. I wonder what he said after it, but I don't think there's something that he could say after it that makes much sense either. So
that makes much sense either. Like, I think he made perfect sense there. It is a bullshit thing to say that Jews are an ethnicity. Saying that Jews are an ethnicity is just a relabeling of race. If you study the early history of Zionism, you learn that Zionism began at the same time as the age of scientific racism, specifically race theory. And in race theory, which happened in the late 1800s, they believed that Jews were a separate race of people called Semites. And after race was debunked as a pseudoscience, all Zionists and Jewish supremacists did was they relabeled Jews as a race to Jews as an ethnicity. The word ethnicity didn't even exist back then. It was coined in the 1950s by cultural anthropologists, but I'll talk about that more a little bit later.
all ethnicities are constructed. All ethnicities are made up bullshit created.
Okay, so he says all ethnicities are constructed. That is technically true. It is. So I actually responded to what BadEmpanada said right here. And I say that all ethnicities are constructed. All ethnicities are social constructs. But to say or imply that they are all equally BS, I don't agree with that. So ethnicity was constructed to help cultural anthropologists understand ancient people. And cultural anthropologists needed a system to understand ancient people because there were gaps in the historical record of human beings. Obviously, we don't have information and data that's complete. We don't have a complete historical record. There are gaps in there. So to help fill in those gaps, they created this system of categorizing human beings. These categories, these ethnic labels, were not described. I have to make that really, really clear. They were not described, meaning these people did not call themselves by these ethnic labels. They were ascribed. What that means is that culture anthropologists applied these labels to these ancient people. And it's not total bullshit because it had predictive value in that it could help us understand certain ancient people by making some educated guesses, or I shouldn't even call it educated guesses, but rather inferences based upon how, basically the way that these ethnic groups would branch off from one another. So ethnicity was primarily delineated on linguistic grounds. Okay, it is not delineated on genetics or DNA, or it has no basis in biology. It is something that it's a system that's used in cultural anthropology, which is a social science, which is by definition the study of social constructs. Okay, that's to differentiate it from a natural science like biology, which it has no relevance in. That nowhere in biology will you ever see the word ethnicity. We do not use the word ethnicity in regards to other animals or other life forms. We don't, because there's no such thing. It's a social construct. But I don't agree with him when he says that it's BS or bullshit, because that would, I feel, there was a reason why it was created, and it was created to do what I said. It had some predictive value. It's not useless. Where it is useless is when you create a a group like Jew that has no relevance in cultural anthropology and has no predictive value and is actually uh, it's nonsensical because it Jew describes an adherent of a religion, and we don't do that for any other ethnic group. And if they do, then it's equally nonsense because you can convert into it. So ethnicity loses any kind of predictive value if you can convert into it. So that's the reason why cultural anthropologists discourage the use of ethnicity to describe contemporary people. Now, do they? Do they use it in things like sociology? Perhaps they do, but they shouldn't. But anyway, let's go on because I'm talking a lot and we're not responding specifically to what he's saying here.
To divide human beings along imagined innate ties. So an ethnic group is just whatever people think, whatever enough people think is one, basically.
I don't agree with that either. Perhaps you can have bad, poorly constructed ethnic groups, which is what Jew is. It's a poorly constructed bullshit ethnic label. And the clear evidence that it's bullshit is that you can convert into it. Anyone can be a Jew. I could be a Jew if I really wanted to. If I wanted to convert and become a Jew, I could. And then all of a sudden, Israel would grant me the law of return and say that I'm actually from this land that I've never been to, and my ancestors are not from there. So I mean that reveals the farce of uh, Israel and its basis, being a Jewish state and this bullshit about them claiming that this is where they are from. No, Zionism was nothing more than an Ashkenazi separatist movement. So I made videos about all this stuff. And I really wish, he would do, BadEmpanada. He makes good videos, but he has not really examined, um, you know, and analyzed and critiqued Jew as an identity. And that's what I focused a lot on because I feel like you need to attack that in order to really get at the root of Zionism and uproot it. Um, because that's Jews are so brainwashed into believing that this is actually where they're from, even though they're white, they're clearly European, but they think that they're from the Middle East. And they're just so brainwashed into thinking that. No, you got to attack the root of the basis of what they believe in. While this basis may not be important to you or to other liberals, and I've encountered this so many times when I'm arguing with liberals about this, they say it's not important. No, it's important to them. So that's why you have to refute it.
Either themselves or others. That's really how it works. There's not like a valid ethnicity and an invalid ethnicity or anything like that. So just
I don't like that wording, when he says there's no such thing as a valid ethnicity and invalid ethnicity, because the implication of that is that ethnicity then therefore becomes above reproach, which means that you can't critique it, which is not true. Of course you can critique it. You can critique gender, the trans community has defined gender as a social construct that's distinct from biological sex. And that's fine. However, once people start constructing gender categories that do not have a sexual counterpart, the implication then therefore becomes that you can't ever criticize these things, which is, of course, not true. Of course you can. Okay? Social constructs are not above reproach. So I don't like the wording that he uses, invalid and valid, there, because the implication is that you can't ever criticize ethnicity or ethnic groups. Of course you can, which is what he's doing here anyway, right? He's saying that they're all bullshit, which I don't even agree with. I think that certain ethnic groups are bullshit, like Jew. That's a bullshit ethnic group. In fact, let's just watch my video about this and you'll get a better understanding. Jews, Jewish, Judaism is not an ethnicity. The myth that Jews are an ethnicity traces to Zionism. Early Zionists, however, did not call Jews an ethnicity. they called Jews a race. This was later relabeled to ethnicity because race was debunked as a pseudoscience and is nothing more than a social construct. However, ethnicity, in the context that Zionists use it, means the same exact thing as race. It's just a relabeling of it. The reason why early Zionists called Jews a race is because early Zionists were not Jews. They were atheists. They had to leverage a series of lies, laying claim to land that does not belong to them, masquerading under the auspices of them being Jewish. Jews can be of any race or any ethnicity because Judaism is not a gene, it's a meme, and anyone can convert to Judaism. All modern Jews are converts, including Ashkenazi Jews. However, there are many different kinds of Jews. Black Jews are called Beta Israel. There are also Indian Jews. There's even Chinese Jews called Kaifeng Jews. The Torah Jews on Twitter, the Jewish people, are not an ethnic group. Jews can be of any ethnicity, race, or nationality. Israel is not a Jewish state. Jews belong to many nationalities around the world. Israel is not actually a Jewish state. It is, in fact, a white Ashkenazi ethno-state. Israel was giving contraception to black Ethiopian Jewish women that sterilized them without their knowledge. Thousands black Jewish women were sterilized without their consent to preserve a white European ethnic makeup. Haaretz also reported on this, stating Israel admits Ethiopian women were given birth control shots. Thousands of women were sterilized without their knowledge. Israel is not a Jewish state. It is an Ashkenazi ethno-state. So there you go. So that's the reason why we say that Jews are not an ethnicity, because anyone can convert and become a Jew. Okay? So let's listen more.
Say like a constructed ethnicity, that part doesn't make sense. And like demonic ethnicity, oh yeah, he was going to get banned for that. I imagine you could say that about Palestinians and probably get away with it, but you certainly can't say it about Jews and get away with it. It's so funny as well that Asmongold is like the person complaining about this the most. Asmongold, who called for the genocide of Palestinians on his stream. Give me a fucking break. But aside from that, like if you were charitable and you would say like, oh, he meant Zionist or he meant Israeli, maybe. But I mean, his words, they were pretty deliberate. They were pretty clear. He said ethnicity. He said ethnicity. He didn't say Zionist. Zionist isn't an ethnicity. It's like a political ideology, a social ideology. So
here's the thing about ideology. It turns out that being a Jew is a choice. So Jew is a social construct. So is ethnicity. Even though I don't believe that Jews are an ethnicity, but even putting that aside, it is still a social construct. Okay? And it's a choice. So when you get down into it, and by the way, if you challenge Jews being a choice, just watch this video. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's over 20 minutes long. But long story short, a social construct is a choice if it's not being imposed. There are situations where a social construct can be imposed, but that is not the case with Jews, outside of maybe some very fringe cases where your parents or your family are imposing it upon you. But once you become an adult, you're a grown fucking person. Okay, you have a choice. Even if you aren't aware of the choice, you still have a choice. Belief is not an excuse for not making a choice. And since Jew is a social construct, that means that there aren't any physically defining biological features that define and delineate what a Jew is. It is not biological. It is, in fact, ideological. Okay, since it is a choice. Whether the individual realizes it or not, there is an ideology behind it. And in fact, when we look at many Jews, they do not actually usually identify as Zionist unless it's within a certain context. So if I look at Anthony Blinken's Wikipedia page and if I type in the word Zionist, nothing comes up because he doesn't identify as a Zionist. Most Jews don't identify as Zionists unless it's in a particular context, like I talked about. But if I type in JEW, Jew, it comes up. So this is how people identify as. Jews identify as Jews. They very rarely actually identify as Zionist. It does not come up in their person's biography, but yet it comes up constantly. Uh, Being a Jew constantly comes up. So, and it goes further than that. Okay, it goes further than that. Jews do not weaponize Zionist or Zionism typically. I mean, yeah, they did, I guess, in the past, but they far more often weaponize Jewish identity and leverage Jewish privilege to slander their critics and immunize themselves from critique. And honestly, they use liberals to do this too. And I've critiqued that in other videos as well. So because of that, it's not so simple to just simply say we can only attack Zionism or Zionists because it's an ideology. No, Jew is also ideologically based. It's an identity, but so is Zionist. That's also an identity, but both are ideologically based. Now, with that said, you could counter that by saying that there are Jews who are against Zionism, which I would agree with. However, I believe that the category of or the identity of Jew has been so heavily tainted by all these bad Zionist Jews that you're better off instead of constantly saying that these people aren't Jews, which is not even correct anyway. That's a no true Scotsman fallacy. And I've critiqued that in other videos as well. It's an uphill battle, and you're not going to win that battle. Okay? These Zionist Jews, these Jewish supremacists, are leveraging their Jewish identity and weaponizing it. And what can you do to stop that? You don't really have any direct control over what they're doing, but you do have control over what you're doing. And you could easily just renounce your Jewish identity because, as I pointed out, it is a choice. It is a choice. You don't have to be a Jew. You could choose not to do that. You could choose not to identify as a Jew. You can also change your label. Now, I'm not saying any of these things are easy to do, but believe it or not, changing the name of the religion or changing the name of the adherents is not unheard of. So for one thing, religious Jews don't actually call themselves Jews. Okay, so for example, the Haredi, they don't call themselves Jews when they talk to each other and whatnot. They refer to themselves as Haredi. So that's one example. Like perhaps at some point, the Haredi Jews, who many of them, I don't know if all of them, but many of them are actually anti-Zionist. I do think at some point they should probably just renounce their Jewish identity and impose on the rest of us to call them the Haredi, but not Jew. I think that's actually a good idea, but no one cares what I think. And the other good Jews who are just atheists, the label Jew for them is completely nonsensical. It's complete idiocy. So they should just renounce their Jewish identity if they don't support genocide. Okay. Um, and like I said, this is not unfounded. This is not unheard of. You got to understand, like, there was a time when Islam was called Mohammedanianism in the West. Okay. I don't think Muslims ever called themselves Mohammedanians, but that's what we called them, right? So you can see there's a disconnect between what we, everyone else, calls people from another religion, Mohammedanianism or Mohammedanians, and what they call themselves. So at a certain point, Muslims impose on the rest of us, stop calling us that, call us Muslims and call our religion Islam. And I believe that going forward, you know, the anti-Zionist Jews should do the same thing too. They should impose upon the rest of us to not call them Jews anymore. I think that's a good idea. And to call them by what they actually call themselves. I think that's a much better idea. And by the way, the word Jew and Judaism, these are not even uh, historically accurate words that are being pronounced correctly. If you look at the German word for Jew, it's actually Juden, and it begins with a J, but it's pronounced with a Y sound, Juden. So we're not even pronouncing the word Jew correctly. That's a mispronunciation. It's supposed to be pronounced with a Y sound. So it is, in fact, a total bullshit constructed ethnicity. I agree with him. Maybe he phrased it in a way that he mentioned Osmond Gold. That doesn't surprise me. Osmond Gold is a Jewish supremacist. I called him out in another video. He's a total Jewish supremacist and a racist. So it doesn't surprise me that he would harp on this and try to get this guy banned. Those are the true colors right there. He's a Jewish supremacist. So why on earth would you even bother to try and you're perhaps not explicitly, but you're implicitly defending this scumbag Osmond Gold and Jewish supremacists, because Jew is a bullshit constructed ethnicity, and it's ideologically based. So that's all I gotta say. See you later.